Yeah.
We
There we go.
shit.
All right, you guys can talk later. All right, so today what I'd like to look at is just understanding the docs. Like I said, and I've said this over and over and over, all your materials are right here if you want to look in at the different, what the tests are going to look at. I sent you via Remind, I sent you the 51-page, testing day booklet, but there's a meeting tonight, so with teachers on and a big webinar, so I will get the basic information and I'll get that out to you guys early. The other thing I do want to kind of point out here is this. Oh, I'm in world history. Let's get over to my class or to our class here. Sorry.
You're fine. But we're still gonna 1v1 on the 8-ball and stuff. I haven't forgot last time, dude.
Say less.
I'm not gonna lose this time, bro. Trust me.
You guys playing pool?
Yeah, we was playing pool last time and I lost badly, but it ain't gonna happen again.
Sucked.
Whatever.
Come on, you don't look like you can play pool. No offense.
Okay.
No offense. All right.
It's fine.
So one of the things I've done here, and this is the DBQ Understanding the Docs page. So here's College Board Review for Apush. If, this is, I know a couple of these teachers. I've met them before, like this Horton, and I met one of the other ones that leads one of the other. But you could see they don't really have, they have them in some sort of order, but not in great order. So you can kind of jump around. Some of them are scheduled for a couple of days from now. But essentially, they are the big reviews, and they're put out by AP. So always a good idea to kind of keep in mind for that. My suggestion, as always, is kind of keep with Heimler's History or Khan Academy. This Fiveable is pretty good, but again, they're just resources. So what we've been doing over the last couple of classes is just practicing a couple of the skills. What I'm looking to do is we're going to write our first DBQ here coming up. So here is the contextualization practice that I assigned on Monday, and here's the thesis practice. So what I'd like to do is just real quick show you guys a couple of examples here. Let's see if I got the right one. Okay. So you should see here now, like exploring the document's context. And what I did is I just pulled a couple of students who did theirs. But again, what I want us to kind of focus in on is this idea that context lays out the story of what you're going to talk about. So when you see questions like this, evaluate the relative importance of different causes, of national identity, of womanhood, of African-American rights and movements. So you could see all of these questions. We need to think in really big, broad terms. What we don't want to do is try to answer the thesis, okay, or answer with a thesis. We are simply just telling the big story. So when I look at like number 1 here, evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the change in national identity. So really, how did Americans begin to view themselves? And how did that development kind of change over time? And here's what I like here. So this person said, like, over time, American national identity would be shaped politically or economically as the new nation struggled to become a global presence in the 1800 to 1860. Again, we don't worry about grammar so much as long as the key idea there. What I see is this person is trying to describe America's place in the world. We move from being this backward, isolated country to actually becoming a nation that is powerful in the world. Now, the one problem I foresee with that kind of approach, it works, but my only problem is we know that the United States is not very globally oriented during this time period. This is a time period where really we're worried about ourselves, slavery, things like that, although you could argue it, okay? So even though I don't necessarily agree with where this person went, it does definitely provide context. It tells us the big ideas. If we look at this next one, how womanhood changed, we could see before the American Revolution, women were seen as submissive. After what we begin to see, women are wage earners. So again, we have big context here, okay? And what I'm going to do is show you this, the second one. Let me pull it over here. And this one's a little bit different. This person, sorry, there we go. Let's see, let me stop share. And we are going to share. I think it's this one. Okay. So you guys see I have exploring, same one again, but we should have different answers now.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So what we see here is the person has tried to do context, but really what they did thesis. Remember, they have to tell the big story. How do I know this is thesis instead of context? Even though this is the context one, we're still working on context. I know this is thesis because I can see that they are making claims here. Democratic participation affected politics and voting rights. I can see that it changed rapidly. So this idea that we gotta tell the story. What happens with America's national identity? How did womanhood change over time? And they're kind of getting close, but I see them much more as thesis as opposed to context. Now, I will say this, if you look at number 3, evaluate the extended change in goals and strategies and accomplishment of the African American rights movement from 1865 to 45. So this is before the civil rights movement. And what I see them do, and the reason I think this is a lot more thesis is because all they're doing is restating the prompt. And that's fine, I guess, but really with context, we want to tell the big story. So we can see they changed quickly due to how citizens were actively participating in the movement and would be treated. So to me, those are 2 claims and not necessarily context. Yeah, I'd say that's the same thing across the board. So tell the big story. So what we're going to actually, going to look at here is today is to begin to look at understanding and using documents. And so again, we're using the same questions. I'm not changing the questions at all. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of grabbing some different pieces from here or there. So now what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to really understand what the document is coming across and telling us. We know we always want to look at the source material. We got to look at the imagery and the symbolism, what information is being addressed to us. And what we want to try to do is write it in a way that is understandable and can convince the reader that you understand what you're talking about. So in this regard, this is actually taken from AP World History. Their question is, evaluate the effects of various strategies implemented by governments that promoted their own visions of industrialization. So it's kind of a big BS question, but the idea is evaluate the effects of the strategies to bring about industrialization. And so what we can see here from this graph is we can see over time that more railways were constructed. More people were employed by those railways. So we can see the strategy is if you build the railways, the jobs will come. And kind of here's how I would break that down, right? The effect of German state-sponsored industrialization shown in this document is more German people getting jobs. The effect is seen in the dramatic increase in the number of workers permanently employed, and then you can see some specific numbers. So the idea is we want to be able to look at this information, pull out quickly what we need to do and what we need to relate, and then move on. So what I've done is with each question, and there are 5 of them, I've provided two documents that I would like for you to just kind of quickly break down. What can you get from this, and how does the information tie back to what your question is? Okay, so how about we look at document 1 here together, and this is where I would like for you guys, if you can, to kind of shout out. I know we've seen this multiple times, especially when we talk about national identity. So immediately, what can we pull from this image or the source material? And I'm asking you guys.
I don't see it right now.
Oh, then thank you. That's why I need help like that sometimes. I think I went. Can you see it now?
Yeah, now I can see it.
Okay. So, do you guys remember where we saw this before?
Oh, I went over this with you. Okay, I think I remember some of what we talked about. Does this have something to do with patriotism?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How do we know that? How does patriotism tie into national identity?
I think that's something to say we owe allegiance to no crown.
Okay, so yeah, but how does that represent patriotism?
I don't know. I see the U.S. flag represents the patriotism because basically you guys, we stand for our own rights and basically just for freedom.
And not a king. So the individual is the most important. So when we start talking about national identity, we begin to, this is the first time that the United States, I shouldn't say first, this is like the second or third time that we begin to see ourselves, as a country, as a national or as an individual country. The other thing to look at is 1814. What happened prior to 1814 that might cause people in the United States to be much more tied to the idea of a United States?
Does it have something to do like with the being like the U.S. having like the U.S. being as a nation? Like, I'm trying to explain this, but
what happened in 1812? So let me ask. I'll ask an even bigger question. During these sorts of time periods, people tend to be much more patriotic and nationalistic. So when a country goes into war, people rally behind the flag. So what happened prior to 1814 that might cause Americans to rally around the flag?
The U.S. was gaining basically more of a national power. Okay. Something like that.
I would agree. What happened in 1812? War of 1812.
1812.
So we had another little conflict with Great Britain. I don't know if you remember this, but Great Britain, it was mostly over trading rights, a little bit about Canada. Great Britain invades the United States. They burn Washington, D.C. and the White House to the ground. Then we signed another Treaty of Paris. Remember, we signed a whole bunch of Treaty of Parises. This was just another one. But in 1812, it caused us to rally around the flag. And so you can kind of, who does this figure represent? Who does the woman represent? And any of you other guys can talk. I do appreciate, Jaquan, you stepping up, but don't feel like the other. Apparently all gentlemen are showing up today. Ladies in the house are not present. So what's the woman represent? Where else have we seen like a woman leading people, or woman who was, and it's more of a figurative woman, not a real woman?
Could it be the lady from the Westward Expansion?
Good. Excellent. Yeah. So remember, they kind of represent the idea of like of liberty, of freedom, and so that's, I think, what she's kind of representing. And it, the whole "we owe allegiance to no crown." Notice his crown is actually, we can't really tell. Is she placing it on his head or is she removing it from his head? I don't know. But what I can pull from this is that in times of war, notice we get chains that are broken here. So the chains that have tied us to our British past. How did we do it? We did it through, so there had to be something involved with shipping or trade. So again, what I'm looking to do here when I try to break down this document, what are the key things I can pull out that tie back to this question? Mm-hmm. So in this case, I would argue war prompts American people to rally around the flag. Right? Do you guys kind of see that?
Yeah.
And there's others, of course. So, we're rally around liberty or freedom. But again, reinforcing democratic values, broken chains, another big symbolic. And it looks like he broke something there. I can't really tell what he broke, but I'm sure that has some significance there as well. If we were to look at, and again, we're still talking about national identity. If we look at the presidential election of 1860, what we can see is that Lincoln wins. I mean, he basically kicks butt. The Democratic vote gets split up by Breckinridge and Douglas, but essentially Lincoln wins the free states and Breckinridge and Douglas win the other ones. Well, you got the Bell. Mm-hmm. Oh, no, those are Southern Democrats. But anyway, so what can we tell about national identity here? What is national identity tied
to? Slavery.
Yes,
maybe
100%. So we can see that in this case, national identity revolves around patriotism to the flag. Now, national identity revolves around whether you believe that slaves should be free or slaves should not be free. So national identity has changed over time. Again, if we go back to our question, evaluate the relative importance of different causes for the changes in national identity. So one of the causes of the change of national identity from rally around the flag to are you free, are you pro-slave or anti-slave, revolves around this big idea of slavery. So now it's identified. We even see that today, whether people identify themselves as conservatives or liberals, people who are East Coast versus left or West Coast. I mean, we have all these national identities as well. So I think this one's a pretty easy one to break down. But again, what we want to do is try to develop the paragraph to where we're actually utilizing as much specific factual information. I can't emphasize that enough. Specific factual info. So what can you pull from that will help to reinforce your arguments? So I do think we've been doing this way long. So I think you guys should be fairly good at this by now. But I just kind of we'll just have this one last little practice. And then what I'm going to actually look to do is on Monday, the next time we meet, I'm going to give you guys a time DBQ. So you'll have.
So next Monday?
Yeah. So we'll do our one last little practice here, and then next Monday we'll have a time DBQ where it'll be open for like 48 hours. What I'm really wanting you guys to do more than anything is to practice doing a DBQ within 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the tough thing. Limiting yourself to 10 minutes of kind of prep work, of reading everything, of organizing your documents, and then being able to then write it in about 35 minutes. That's going to be tough.
All right.
But I think you guys are able to do it because you guys have a good grasp of the necessary things that go into it. The last thing that I'd like to kind of show you here is make sure that you're continually reviewing the rubric. And I can't emphasize that enough. What points are doable? And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at the rubric, and here's the rubric here, the modified DB. When you look at the rubric, again, I think every single one of you can get a thesis point if you lay out two strong claims with a little bit of explanation. If you
Mm-hmm.
provide context, you provide a broader historical understanding. And then I think very, very easily you guys can get 2 of the 3 points for evidence. Easily. All you have to do is describe what is in 2 documents. That's essentially what we're working on then today, is you're describing what is in the documents. So that's an easy point for you to make. Then can you use the documents to help your argument? So if you have at least 1 claim, you have 2 documents to support it, that's a point. 2 claims, 2 documents each, that's 4 documents total. I think you guys can use 4 documents. And so right there is 4 of the 5. If you can use all your documents, there's 5 points right there. Then you're halfway there. If you can get like a 6 or a 7, you're going to be that much farther ahead than every other student. So when you look at evidence beyond the docs, that's the last thing we're going to kind of talk about on Monday. Evidence beyond the doc, what sort of evidence can you bring in that would help to explain? So if we're talking about national identity, what sort of outside evidence could I bring in that was not discussed in the docs? Maybe I might talk about War of 1812, our national anthem was written by Francis Scott Key. So that when we talk about rallying around the flag, if I mention the writing of our national anthem and the fact that it helps us to make connections to the flag and to patriotism, that's outside evidence.
Mm.
Okay,
Does,
so you can, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. So, when speaking about the national identity of the outside evidence, can I maybe ask something like maybe the Civil War?
But you got to be more specific. What might you say?
Like basically of if I say this correctly, basically like African Americans like gaining the rights instead of stay being slaves.
Okay, how would that be national identity? That's the key thing. How can you tie it back to national identity?
Uh, basically let them being equal to white men or white people.
Excellent. So you could easily say the Civil War, really what that did is that was the culmination of Thomas Jefferson's writings in the Declaration of Independence when he said all men are created equal. Our national identity wholly manifested itself at the end of the Civil War, where we were actually able to say all men are created equal. Now, of course, we're not talking about women because they weren't created equal. We know, of course, Native Americans were not. So there certainly were issues, but what we see is the Civil War, just like what Jaquan was saying, the Civil War helped to bring about a greater emphasis on equality, national identity. I would agree.
All right.
So with that in mind, yeah, all we have today is just a new, so we have the 3 steps that we've been doing. Here's contextualization if you haven't done it. Here's thesis practice if you haven't done it. And then here's understanding the documents practice. So my suggestion, and then continue to keep reviewing when you get the opportunity. If you have an area that you are weak at, let's say, for example, if we're talking about like the 1820s, let's say we're talking about Andrew Jackson and the growing political power to the common man. Let's talk about that theme. If I am unsure about that time period, then I'm just going to study in general and try to be able to pull a couple of very easy key things that I could use. So that's why I would be very surgical in how I study. Look for the big themes, which ones you feel comfortable with, which ones you don't feel comfortable with, and study the ones you don't feel comfortable with. And all study means is is reviewing some facts, being able to tie it together. Yeah, I think you guys are pretty straightforward on that. I don't know. Any questions you guys might have?
I have one more question. My question is, I forgot. I remember you sent us a message saying we'll get tested through period 5 through. I forgot what periods are we getting tested through.
3 through 7. So basically, we're talking about. Let's see. Revolutionary War through World War II.
Okay.
So it's basically about 1700 through 1945.
Okay, that's all I want to understand on.
Yeah. So, and limit yourself. You know, you do not have to study 1 and 2. You do not have to study 7 and 8, or 8 and 9. Sorry. So 3 through 7 only.
All right, got it.
And even then, I wouldn't even think I'd think big, broad terms. I really think they're going to start to ask questions about like what we're seeing here. We're going to probably see questions that are big and broad, like this one. To what extent did the ideals of American womanhood change from the Revolution to the Civil War? So notice how big the time frame is. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if we look at African American rights movements, notice again, it's almost 100-year period. So I think that's what we're going to see is big questions like that and not real specific stuff. Mm-hmm. You know, how did women's rights change over time? How did African Americans' rights change over time? How did the idea of national identity change over time? Mm-hmm. So we want to think in big, big, broad strokes. Mm-hmm. Anybody else have a question?
No, I'm good.
All right. So, Miles, Quinn, I guess you're good. So again, I know these times aren't good for everybody. So if you ever need to, let's say, hey, I'm much better working at 6 p.m., just let me know and we'll hook up at that time and we can go through like your assignments together. We can specifically look at your work. So instant feedback helps the most. All right. So I'm going to work on grades all day long. So I would suspect by like 6 o'clock today, everything will be updated. I'm much like many other people. I haven't done much. I think it's easy to sit there and not do anything. So anyway, good to go. Any last questions?
No, sir.
All right. Take your time. If you have questions, let me know.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you guys for showing up.
You're welcome. See ya.
Bye.